And I've read some pieces that you've written about your personal experience as a physician. Um, the moment where somebody comes in, you're there, you're wearing the white coat, you probably have the stethoscope around your neck, and people ask, when does the real doctor here get here? Obviously, sort of thinking that a woman of color couldn't be a doctor. So I'm just you described that, you thumbnailed that incident in a piece I read recently in preparation for this interview. But did you experience other um, uh, incidents of racism as you were getting trained? And I'm wondering how, I guess in some sense, how systemic your own experience has been with race.
Yeah. You know, Peter, one of the things that I'm very cautious about is I experience everything. And you referenced the op-ed I wrote, and it's very intentional about saying, I don't know what actually was in that person's heart and mind, right? But what I will tell you is that those disparities or those observations were quite systemic. And probably when they hit me the most weren't when things happened to me directly, because I actually had control over how I could respond. But the times that were really heartbreaking were when you would see differences in how patients were being treated by my colleagues as physicians, or when I was, within medical education system, and we were interviewing and assessing the candidacy of, you know, different students for residency positions or post-residency to hire. You would hear clusters of words that seem to correlate with race and or gender, right? And so you'd hear the word angry often, and I would know that they were referring to somebody, a person of color. You would hear after somebody walked into a room to take care of somebody that they were exaggerating their pain, or they're likely just there with pain-seeking behavior, dismissing, the experience they were having. And so it is quite systemic. And I think a lot of it is actually unconscious. Some of it is very intentional as well. But I would say that, for somebody who lives in America as a person of color, probably not a day goes by where you see something and makes you wonder. It doesn't always mean that it's based on racism. And quite frankly, I want to highlight there are also many other forms of bias that I think really impact health equity, whether it's sexual orientation, age, language, ethnicity. And so racism and bias are with us. And I think our only chance of addressing it is if we can become both self-aware and aware of what's happening in our surroundings.
Um, yeah, I guess the the many factors affect, it isn't just a race issue, that there are many overlying and interrelated ways that sort of people look at other people. It's sort of interesting. I would suspect that the people who were saying these things that were probably pretty idealistic people, right? I mean, they went into medicine, they want to heal people, they're smart as all heck. So I don't know, how did you square that? These
I'm with
educated
you.
people, you know?
And here's one of the lessons that when I was in medical school, we were still learning about how to use race as a risk factor in terms of assessing whether somebody was more likely to have diabetes or more likely to die from congestive heart failure. And what you realize, and now that I've advanced in my professional career, I think we, even in medicine, have a better understanding that it's racism and all those things associated with it, whether it's poverty, housing insecurity, education gaps, that cause these worse outcomes. And so, in some ways, historically, we as a industry and we as healthcare organizations have propagated these disparities by embedding them into our algorithms. There was an article in the New England Journal of Medicine that actually published, the most frequently used race-based algorithms that we continue to use today. Race is not a genotype, it's a phenotype. And so there are insidious ways that we've embedded these disparities by making them normal. So for those folks that you say are idealistic and have the best intentions in mind and have the intelligence to navigate, I would say yes, yes, yes. But we've been trained and to create these constructs and ways of thinking that we almost have to step out to actually look at how we're thinking and not just, the process that we use to make decisions.
Yes, I think that there's still some thinking about race as a biomedical factor or, constituent in somebody's identity, and not taking into account sort of the political and economic aspects to that categorization. Although I wonder whether eyes have been opened over the last year and a half or so, and presumably training has changed. So you have written about healthcare equity, and in sort of fairly lofty ways about it being a fair and just opportunity for every individual to achieve their full potential in all aspects of health and well-being. It resonated with me because I think it sounded a little bit like the UN Declaration of Human Rights that came out after World War II. And, this kind of thinking and argument and so on is familiar if you have entered into the discourse about health as a human right. But I guess for me, something always grabs, and it's like, oh, this is so aspirational. This is, I use the term lofty, I think rather intentionally. I'm just wondering, do you worry that, or think, or that having such a high goal, it might mean that it never gets reached, and this ends up being sort of just talk?
Yeah. I mean, and so Peter, I would probably separate that into two different questions for me, at least the way I receive it. So is it aspirational? Absolutely, yes. And I'm going to get this quote that from Nelson Mandela exactly wrong, but he says something like, it's only impossible until you get it done. And so when you think about other aspirations that we have had as a country, as a global population, we wanted to go to the moon, and we did. We wanted to establish democracy in America, and we did. We wanted to learn how to cure cancer, and we did. And so I'm a strong believer that if you put the right resources, investment, and time, we can actually accomplish a lot more together than any one of us can do as an individual. And then maybe to the latter part of your question, can we ever get there? I hope so. I don't know that we can, but regardless of what the answer to that question is, I think that not having certainty of whether we can accomplish it or not doesn't absolve us of the responsibility from waking up every single day and taking action to advance it. And so my goal in my lifetime is to both myself as a professional and my network and in the communities that I live and influence to advance it as far as I can, and then hand it to the next generation and hope that they take it even further.